Amy Tan, Mother Tongue. Amy Tan is an author of novels, children's books, essays, and a memoir. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, National Geographic, and other magazines. She is best known for her novel, The Joy Luck Club, which examines the lives of and the relationship between four Chinese American daughters and their mothers. The following selection was first delivered as a talk at a symposium as language in San Francisco in 1989. As you read, pay attention to how Tan describes the difference between the Englishes he speaks. I am not a scholar of English or literature. I cannot give you much more than personal opinions on the English language and its variations in this country or others. I am a writer, and by that definition, I am someone who has always loved language. I am fascinated by language in daily life. I spend a great deal of time thinking about the power of language, the way it came to evoke an emotion, a visual image, a complex idea, or a simple truth. Language is a tool of my trade, and I use them all the Englishes I grew up with. Recently, I made a keenly aware of the different Englishes I do use. I was giving a talk to a large group of people, the same talk I had already given to half a dozen other groups. The nature of the talk was about my writing, my life, and my book, The Joy Luck Club. The talk was going along well enough until I remembered one major difference that made the whole talk sound wrong. My mother was in the room, and it was perhaps the first time she had ever heard me give a lengthy speech, using the kind of English I have never used with her. I was saying things like the intersection of memories upon imagination, and there is an aspect of my fiction that relates to thus and thus. A speech filled with carefully wrought grammatical phrases burdened, it suddenly seemed to me, with non-monominalized forms, past perfect tenses, conditioned phrases, and the forms that standard English that I had learned in the school, and through books, the forms of English I did not use at home with my mother. Just last week, I was walking down the street with my mother, and again I found myself conscious of the English I was using, the English I do use with her. We were walking without talking about the price of a new and used furniture, and I heard myself saying this: not waste money that way. My husband was with us as well, and he didn't notice any switch in my English. And then I realized why. It's because over 20 years we've been together, I've often used the same kind of English with him, and sometimes he even uses it with me. It has become our language of intimacy, a different sort of English that relates to family talk, the language I grew up with. So you'll have some ideas of what this family talk I heard sounds like. I'll quote that what my mother said during a recent conversation, which I videotaped and then transcribed. During this conversation, my mother was talking about a political gangster in Shanghai who had been the same last name as her family, Du, and how the gangster in his early years wanted to be adopted by her family, which was rich in comparison. Later, the gangster became more powerful, far richer than my mother's family, and one day showed up at my mother's wedding to pay his respects. Here's what he said in part: Du Jungon, having business like fruit stand, like off the street kind. He is Du like Du Zhong, but not Zumbing Island people. The local people call Putong the river east side. He he belonged to the side local people. That man want to ask Du Zong father to take him like become own family. Duzong father wasn't looking down on him, but didn't take seriously until the man became a man until the man big like became a mafia. Now important persons very hard to inviting him Chinese way. Came only to show respect. Don't stay for dinner. Respect for making big celebration. He shows up. Mean gives lots of respect. Chinese custom. Chinese social life that way. If too important, won't have to stay too long. He comes to my wedding. I didn't see. I heard it. I gone to boys' side. They have YMCA dinner. Chinese age. I was 19. You should now You should know that my mother common of language, expressive common of language of English uh, belies on how much she actually understands. She reads the Forbes report, listens to Wall Street Week, converses daily with her stockbroker, reads all of Shirley MacLaine's books with ease, all kinds of things that I can't begin to understand. Yet some of my friends tell me they understand 50% of what my mother says. Some say they understand 80 to 90%. Some say they understand none of it, as if she were speaking pure Chinese. But to me, my mother's English is perfectly clear, perfectly natural. It's my mother's tongue, her language, as I heard it. It's vivid, direct, full of observation and imaginary and imagery. That was the language that helped me shape the way I saw things, expressed things, made sense of the world. Lately I've been giving more thought of the kind of English my mother speaks. Like others, I have described it to people as broken or fractured English. But I winced when I saw that. It has always bothered me that I can think of no way to describe it other than broken, as if it were damaged and needed to be fixed, as if it lacked certain wholeness and soundness. I heard other terms used, limited English, for example, but they seem just as bad as if everything is limited, including people's perception of the limited English speaking. I know this for a fact because when I was growing up, my mother's limited English limited my perception of her. I was ashamed of her English. I believed that her English reflected the quality of what she had to say. That is, because she expressed them imperfectly, her thoughts were imperfect. and I plenty and I had plenty of empirical evidence to support me. The fact that people in the department store and banks and restaurants did not take her seriously, did not give her good service, pretended not to understand her, or even act as if they did not hear her. My mother has long realized the limitation of her English as well. When I was 15, she used to have to call people on the phone to pretend I was she. And this squeeze I was in this squeeze I was forced to ask for information or even to complain and yell at people who had been rude to her. One time it was to call the stockbroker in New York. She had she had cashed out her small portfolio, and it just happened we were going to New York the next week, our very first trip outside California. I had to get on the phone and say in an adolescent voice that was not very convincing, "This is Miss Tan," and my mother was standing in the back whispering loudly, "Why he don't send me check? Already 2 weeks late. So mad he lied to me, losing me money." And then I said in perfect English, "Yes, I'm getting rather concerned. You have agreed to send me a check 2 weeks ago, but hasn't arrived." Then she began to talk more loudly. "What he want? I come to New York, tell him in front of his boss you're cheating me?" As I was trying to calm her down, make her be quiet, while telling the stockbroker, "I can't tolerate any more excuses. If I don't receive my check immediately, I am going to speak to your manager when I'm in New York next week." Are you sure? The following week I was in front of the astonished stockbroker, and I was sitting there red-faced and quiet, and my mother, the real Miss Tang, shouted at her boss in imperfect, broken English. We used a similar routine just 5 days ago for a situation that was far less humorous. My mother had gone to the hospital for an appointment to find out that about her Beijing brain tumor a CAT scan had revealed a month ago. My mother had gone to the hospital for an appointment to find out about a benign brain tumor a CAT scan had revealed a month ago. She said she had spoken very good English, her best English, no mistakes. Still, she said, the hospital did not apologize when they said they had lost the CAT scan, and she had come for nothing. She said they did not seem to have any sympathy when she told them she was anxious to know the exact diagnosis since her husband and her son both died from the brain tumors. She said they would not give her any more information until the next time, and she would have to make another appointment for that. So she said she would not leave until doctor called her daughter. She wouldn't budge, and when the doctor finally called the daughter, me, who spoke perfect English, lo and behold, we had assurance that the CAT scan would be found. Promises that convince promises that converse call on Monday would be held, and apologies for any suffering my mother had gone through for a most regrettable mistake. I think my mother's English almost had an effect on limiting my possibilities in life as well. Sociologists and linguists probably will tell you that persons developing language skills are more influenced by peers. But I do think that the language spoken in family, especially in immigrant families, which are more insular, plays a large role in shaping the language of the child. And I believe that it affected my results on my achievement tests, IQ tests, and the SAT. While my English skills were never judged as poor compared to math, English could not be considered my strong suit. In grade school, I did moderately well, getting perhaps B's, sometimes B pluses in English, but scored perhaps in the sixth or seventh percentile on achievement tests. But those scores were not good enough to override the opinion that my true abilities lay in the math and science because in those areas I achieved A's and scored in ninth percentile or higher. It was understandable math is perceived. There is only one correct answer, whereas for me, at least the answer on English tests were always a judgment call, a matter of opinion and personal experience. Those tests were considered around items like fill in the blank, sentence completion such as even though Tom was blank, Mary thought he was blank, and the correct answer always seemed to be the most bland uh, combinations of thoughts. For example, even though Tom was shy, Mary thought he was charming. With grammatical structure, even though limiting the correct answer to some sort of semantic opposites. So you would get the answers like, even though Tom was foolish, Mary thought he was ridiculous. Well, according to my mother, there were very few limitations as to what Tom could have been and what Mary might have thought of him. So I never did well on tests like that. The same was true with word analogies, a pair of words in which you were supposed to find some sort of logical, symmetric relationship. For example, sunset is to nightfall as blank is to blank. And here you were to be presented with a list of four possible pairs, which one showed the same kind of relationship. Red is the spotlight, as buses to arrival, chills as to fever, yawn as to boring. Well, I could never think that way. I knew that the tests were asking, but I could not block out my mind in images already created by the first pair. Sunset is to nightfall, and it would be a burst of colors against the darkening sky, the moon rising and lowering of curtains of stairs. And all of the other pair of words, red bus, spotlight, boring, just threw up a mask of confusing images and making it impossible for me to sort out something as logical as saying a sunset precedes nightfall is the same as chill precedes fever. The only way I would have gotten that answer right would have been to imagine an associative situation, for example, my being disobedient and staying out past sunset, catching a chill at night, which turns into feverish pneumonia as a punishment, which indeed did happen to me. I was thinking about all this lately, about my mother's English, about achievement tests, because lately I've been asked as a writer, why are there more Asian Americans represented in American literature? Why are there few Asian Americans enrolled in creative writing and programs? Why do so many Chinese students go into engineering? Well, there are broad sociological questions I can't begin to answer, but I have noticed in the surveys, in fact just last week, that Asian students as a whole always do significantly better on math achievement tests than in English. And this makes me think that there are other Asian American students who English spoken in the in the whole might be as described as broken or limited. And perhaps they have teachers who are steering them away from writing into math and science, which is what happened to me. Fortunately, I happen to be rebellious in the nature and enjoy the challenge of disproving assumptions made about me. I became an English major my first year in college after being enrolled as pre-med. I started notification. Uh, I started writing nonfiction as a freelancer the week after I was told that my former boss that writing was my worst skill and I should have honed my talents towards account management. But it wasn't until 1985 that I finally began to write fiction. And at first, as I wrote, using what I thought was wittily crafted sentences that would finally prove that I had mastery over the English language. Here's an example of the first draft of a story that made its way into the Joy Luck Club, with, but without this line. That was my mental quandary in its nascent state. The terrible line which I can barely pronounce. Fortunately, for reasons I won't get into today, I later decided I should envision a reader for the stories I would write. And the reader I decided upon was my mother, because there were stories about mothers. So with this reader in mind, and in fact she did read my early drafts, I began to write stories using all the Englishes I grew up with, the English I spoke to my mother, which for lack of a better term might be described as simple, the English she used with me, which by the lack of better terms might be described as broken by translation of her Chinese, which could certainly be described as watered down. And what I imagined the translation of her Chinese if she if she could speak in perfect English, her internal language, and for what I sought to preserve the essence, but neither an English nor Chinese structure. I wanted to capture that language ability tests can never reveal. Her intent, her passion, her imaginary, her imagery, and rhythms of her speech and nature of her thoughts. Apart from any apart from any critic had to say about my writing, I knew I had succeeded where it counted when my mother finished reading my book and gave me her verdict. So easy to read.